Hello everyone, Simon here. Welcome back to our architecture tour of Skyrim, and this is going to be the final video, and we're going to Solstheim. How do you pronounce that anyway? So it's the area added in the Dragonborn DLC. If we come over here, Solstheim, Solstheim, Solstheim. I don't know. Solstheim. It's a whole separate island. So the island of Solstheim is in between Morrowind and Skyrim, but to the north. So it's like this kind of area between the two. So back in the third Elder Scrolls game, Morrowind, Solstheim was also a DLC area added in Blood Moon,
Talk to Captain Gyal.
and it has a surprisingly rich history, a surprisingly rich and interesting history. So the first time you arrive at the town, if you're playing the game yourself, and first time you arrive, you actually get a bit of an animation coming in from the water.
This must be that beautiful
And you-
Skyrim weather.
Why are you here?
Do
What?
you need something? All right. Where'd
That's
you
weird.
come from?
I don't know why she's here. So the first time you I lost my train of thought. First time you arrive at the town. Oh my god, dragon! Hold on.
I still remember how to fight.
Hold on. I'll get back to the architecture soon. I promise. Oh crap! It landed up there. Are you serious? You have got to be kidding me. When you first arrive in the town, there's an animation showing you coming in by boat. And they do that because the best view of the city is actually, from the boat, from the harbor. So you'll notice that the city is sitting against these cliffs here, and these kind of volcanic rocks that are interesting too. So these kind of hexagonal volcanic rocks that form a cliff face back here. Where's the dragon gone? So the best view of the city is actually coming in by boat, and it shows you that in the little cutscene, and that's pretty unique because it's like the only time, one of the few times in the game where there are cutscenes. There are other cutscenes and special moments in the game elsewhere, but spoilers, so I won't kind of talk about them. Let me go down into the harbor, or at least go across to the other side of that bit of rock there, and see if we can find the best view of the town. And then look at the architecture, it's cool, right? So we'll talk about all this stuff there later on. Let me just go find a view, and then I'll read a book. In fact, I'll read 3 books, because there's a lot of books that talk about Raven Rock. It's a little strange because this is like a DLC area in 2 different games, and somehow this ended up being one of the most thoroughly designed areas of Skyrim. I think it's probably like it was the last official DLC, so I think the people at Bethesda just really wanted to make it as good as possible. Okay, went too far. So the boat comes in, and it's what time is it? Oh, that's why. Let's wait until daytime so we get more light on the city, and it's gonna be foggy, isn't it? Oh, a little bit. So you come in. Oh, that's right. There's a bulwark as well. So there's a giant bulwark there, and you come behind into the harbor, into there, and there's the city. Well, there's the town of Raven Rock, like that. Well, maybe it's not that impressive. Where is the best view, actually? Maybe I didn't go far enough. It's a little awkward. Maybe there isn't a best view, because there's, like, if you go further out, then the whole town is behind the bulwark. Like the giant block of stone out here. No, it's actually a sequence. It's not a single screenshot, is it? It's not a single view. So the view, like, when you imagine if you're in the boat. Let me just... Actually, do I have water walking? Magic, alteration. What? Oh, there's no water walk. There's water breathe. crap. Never mind. So you come in by boat, and then you come in and the town is revealed to you as you come in on the boat. Basically, that's what's going on. Alright, let's go into our books and read about it because it's quite interesting. So we want to look at the history of Raven Rock. 3 volumes. Alright, here we go. Forward, Raven Rock is one of the more interesting colonies of Morrowind of the last 2 centuries. So much has happened to this tiny town in such a short amount of time, and so many lives have been affected by it. I felt it necessary to describe its rich history within these volumes. During my research, I lived in Raven Rock for almost 3 years, and I got to know many of my fellow Dunmer who call Raven Rock their home. I hope that my readers will appreciate the amount of fortitude and perseverance that it must take to endure life in such an inhospitable and untamed land. Raven Rock was founded in the Third Era 427, so it's a very new town. Third Era 427, by the East Empire Company in response to the discovery of a rich ebony mine on the southern edge of the island of Solstheim. The construction of the town took several months, and the mine immediately started yielding ebony ore that the miners shipped to Windhelm in Skyrim. By Third Era 432, the town was home to over 30 people, all of whom depended on the mine for their livelihood. At this time, Raven Rock was almost exclusively inhabited by Imperials and a few Nords, who were drawn to the mine's wealth. So the Third Era was back when the Empire was quite strong. And so the Imperials from Cyrodiil came all the way out here to set up an ebony mine. When the Oblivion Crisis arose in Third Era 433, Raven Rock remained largely untouched by Mehrunes Dagon's forces, and work continued as usual. The bulk of the Imperial Guard that was stationed in Raven Rock was recalled to Cyrodiil to fight the invading forces, but a few soldiers remained behind in order to protect the ebony mine from bandits. It's unsure whether any Oblivion Gates ever opened on Solstheim, as there appears to be no record of such an event ever occurring there. So the Oblivion Crisis, the Daedra Lord, Mehrunes Dagon, attacked Tamriel, opening a bunch of portals everywhere and dropping monsters everywhere. So that's what that references. So the Imperials were here, they were digging, the local guards were recalled back to the mainland to fight monsters. In the first year of the Fourth Era, after the destruction of Oldrune, many of the Dunmar great houses sent out small groups of their own to seek places to re-establish themselves. So the Fourth Era began when the Emperor died and there were no new Emperors. And so the Empire kind of fragmented at that point. The Argonians decided to attack the Dark Elves. And that's the sacking of Moldrune there. That's what that refers to, right? So the Dark Elves got owned by the Argonians. House Redoran's group was led by Barara Morvayn, who immediately struck out for Solstheim. After some quick negotiations with the East Empire Company, and some speculate quite a bit of coin exchanging hands, Barara's group was allowed to settle in Raven Rock, where they quickly became a part of the mining colony's way of life. The Dunmer proved to be both hardworking and reliable when it came to working in the mines, impressing the East Empire Company and solidifying their relationship. All was going quite well until that fateful day in 4th Era 5, when the Red Mountain suddenly erupted, sending a massive blast across the Sea of Ghosts that struck Solstheim with its full fury. So the Red Mountain explodes in the 5th year of the 4th Era. The Sea of Ghosts is basically the sea to the north of Tamriel. Raven Rock was heavily damaged by this wave of force, which toppled several of its stone structures and obliterated many of the wooden ones. So we start to talk about architecture, right? So the stone buildings were toppled, and the wooden ones were destroyed. Ironically, the mine once again proved to be the town's saving grace, as most of the population of Raven Rock was working underground at the time, and was completely shielded from the blast. This event wasn't without cost, however. Raven Rock was heavily dependent on nearby Fort Frostmoth for its defense, but the eruption had almost completely wiped it from the face of Solstheim. The few soldiers that survived took residence in Raven Rock itself and attempted to set up a makeshift garrison there. but these scant few were hardly a match for potential threats to their town. So there used to be a fort, an imperial garrison nearby, but that got destroyed. With the East Empire Company's permission, Brara brought in some of House Ridderyn's elite Ridderyn Guard to fill the void. The Guard proved to be an ideal replacement for the fallen Imperial soldiers and have been guarding the town ever since. So you can kind of see how the town is slowly shifting from Imperial control to Dark Elf control, to a Dunmar control. So as the Empire is gradually weakening because of the crisis on the mainland, the Imperials are kind of losing ground, and then the Dark Elves are stepping up. So let's get to the second book. After a few years, the relentless ash storms from the ever-erupting Red Mountain had transformed Solstheim's southern reaches into pure ash wastes, reminiscent of those present on Vvardenfell itself. So for those of you who've never played Morrowind, the volcano actually, the volcano is... I'll look at it soon. So the volcano, in Morrowind, there's ash, there's ashlands, where the ash from the mountains basically covers the entire ground, and they're kind of like ash deserts, except that they're quite fertile. So here, the eruptions of Red Mountain have now covered... So Solstheim used to be like a forest, so it was kind of a bit of tundra, and then the southern part was forest. Pine forest, I believe it was. And now, because of Red Mountain, now much of the south of Solstheim has been covered in ash as well. The storms would leave behind deep dunes of ash that made life exceedingly difficult in Raven Rock. In order to protect the town from these drifts, Brara Morvayn proposed that the East Empire Company construct a large wall of their own design to protect the east end of the town. The company quickly agreed and provided the necessary funds. After almost a year, the construction was complete and the huge edifice was named the Bulwark. So the wall that we see here, that's the Bulwark. The wall proved to be extremely effective and allowed work to continue unabated in the mines. In the 4th Era 16, when Solstheim was passed into the hands of the Dunmar people, the East Empire Company was forced to relinquish Raven Rock's control to House Ridderyn. The council quickly named Brara Morvayn as councillor of their new town and allowed her to rule Solstheim as she saw fit. As a result of this changing of the guard, almost the entire Imperial population left Raven Rock and returned to Cyrodiil. Brara continued to welcome the Dunmar that elected to settle on Solstheim. Some chose to stay in Raven Rock to work in the mines, and others took to a more familiar territory and began a nomadic lifestyle in the ash waste. So eventually, Skyrim gave Solstheim, the island of Solstheim, to Morrowind, because by this time, the eruption of Red Mountain has destroyed so much of Morrowind that there were plenty of Dark Elf refugees, and so Skyrim gave this island. I mean, the island was turning into ash anyway, so they gave this island to the Dark Elves, and so to allow give them a place to live basically, because their homeland has been destroyed by the volcano. In the next few decades, were the golden years for Raven Rock. Brara Morvayn was keeping the peace, the mines were still producing large quantities of ebony, and the Dunmar that lived on the island were happy. After almost 50 years of prosperity, in the 4th Era 65, Brara Morvayn finally succumbed to old age and passed away. She was interred in the family ancestral tomb, and her son Lero Morvayn took her place. The people who had lived in Raven Rock during Brara's time as councillor were pleased to discover that Lero shared his mother's notions of leadership. He was fair and compassionate, which kept the people on the island quite happy for many decades. Alright, book 3. All was going well in Raven Rock until 4th Era 95, when an attempt on Lero's life was made without warning. Fortunately, the attack was unsuccessful thanks to the prowess of the Ridderyn Guard. Under questioning by Captain Modin Velith, the assassin was revealed to be Villa Ulin of House Halalu. House Halalu had been at odds with House Ridderyn for years, following their removal from the Council of Great Houses. So, if you're paying attention, there's a lot of intrigue here, and this is the really cool thing about Morrowind as a game, is that there are 3 great houses in Morrowind. And there's a lot of politics and political intrigue, and it's so interesting, that game. Anyway, play Morrowind if you have the time. The Hlaalu believe that House Ridderin was instrumental in this reorganization and have held a grudge ever since. The attempt on Lyra's life was meant to send a message to the Council that House Ridderin was not as mighty as they purported to be, and that they were truly vulnerable and weak. The Ridderin Guard investigated further and discovered that Vilor had been organizing a coup in Ravenrock in an attempt to fully wrest control of the island from Lyra's grasp. Vilor and his conspirators were executed and the coup was quelled. Several recent events have served to solidify the Dunmar's people's respect for Lyra Morvain. In 3rd Era 130, the bulwark began to show its age and threatened to crumble. It's like over 100 years old. The councillor elected to use the bulk of his personal fortune to have it repaired. So the wall was recently, well, not recently, but like 50 years ago it was repaired. In 4th Era 150, a small force of Argonians landed on Solstheim with the intent of wreaking havoc on the island, and Councillor Morvain led the charge against them personally. And in 4th Era 170, when the ebony mine finally began to dry up, he drained the remainder of his coffers, keeping the people fed. By 4th Era 181, the mine's ebony veins were completely exhausted. Lyra ordered the mine to be shut down, and Ravenrock turned into a hunting and fishing for its trade. A few Dunmer families departed Solstheim and returned to the mainland, but most stayed behind. At present, Lyra Morvain is still the ruler of Ravenrock. The Ridderin Guard continues to maintain order within the town and the surrounding area, keeping Ravenrock's residents safe and in line. If even so much as a rumor of dissent reaches Lyra's ears, he has it quashed immediately. He is well aware that there may be a few Hlaalu loyalists still present among her population that would like to see him dead. The future may appear bleak for Ravenrock, but the spirits of its inhabitants will never be broken. So the ebony mine had dried up, and now there's a fishing and hunting town. So there's Red Mountain, and this stuff here, this stuff is the ash. This white-brown stuff is the ash, and the ash is all over there. And so the ash kind of spews from the mountain. There's the bulwark keeping the ash back, and then on the other side of the bulwark is the town. Right? Makes sense? So these stone buildings are the Imperial buildings. And you'll notice that the Imperial buildings are even different from the Nordic buildings in the game, which is cool. So Imperial stone buildings are pretty crude actually. Actually they're pretty crude, there's no eaves. And then there's a few destroyed Imperial buildings over here. We've got some foundations of destroyed buildings. And then over here, these are the Dunmar buildings. The Dark Elf buildings are the ones that with the funny shapes that look like bugs. Giant horseshoe crabs or something. Those are the Dunmar buildings. And then the mine is back there. There's the entrance to the mine. There's a well. That's cool. The well is there, and then the temple, the Dark Elf temple is here. What's it called? So these are the tombs. And there's the temple. Alright, great. Alright, and so there's the town. So if you've played Morrowind before, a lot of this will look very familiar. This is kind of like fan service to the people who really love Morrowind, including me. But I guess if you've watched my Architecture of Morrowind series, you also know a bit about the Dunmar architecture as well. So what I really love about this is how much sense it makes and how much everything you see here ties in with the history. I already talked about like the bulwark itself. Look at this. The bulwark itself, there's the bulwark, and then there's like a tunnel through the ash, and then the ash is up here, and then all the stuff is temporary. So since the bulwark was built, the ash has continued to pile up, and so you can see how the bulwark was originally down here, and so the ground level used to be down here, but as the ash kept piling up and kept piling up, they kind of dug a tunnel into the ash to get into town, and the ash just kind of keeps piling up against the bulwark, and the bulwark is kind of holding the ash back to protect the town from being completely smothered and covered up by the ash, right? So this is cool. I mean, you can see that you can see the history. You can see the history of what's happening here. Like, even if we didn't read the book, you could have read the architecture to say, okay, well, this tunnel is obviously not a part of the bulwark. It's temporary. There's kind of a wooden scaffolding here, and you can just read the architecture and see. Okay, this is the bulwark, and this stuff has happened after the bulwark was built. All this ash piled up, and you can just see that from the arrangement of the things. And then on the other side, of course, you can see like there's no ash down here, and there's ash up here. So then you can tell that the ash is blowing this way from that direction. And you look out, and well, not quite. And like there's the ash mountain there, or the red mountain there. And so you can say, well, okay, so the ash is coming from Red Mountain. It's being piled up against the bulwark. The bulwark's protecting the town. And you come in here and you see this architecture on one side and this architecture on the other side. And then you can see in the history of the town, there's two different cultures with two different architectural styles. And this is the kind of thing I was saying back in the video of Markarth, where there were people living in a Dwarven city, but there was only Dwarven architecture. There was no Nordic architecture. Which is weird, because if two different cultures have lived in the same city, then you would see this sort of thing. You would see, okay, these are the old buildings, and then there are also some newer buildings, or at least different buildings, because there's two different cultures here, and therefore, I mean, even though there are dark elves living in these... Oh crap, this is a door. Even though some of these old Imperial buildings are in fact occupied by dark elves, like this one. This is the councillor, Little Morbane. So even though the Dark Elves live in some of the Imperial buildings, but still they've also built their own buildings, and so you know it's not just one style, because there's two cultures, and in Markarth, because there were the dwarves and then there's the humans, there should be at least two. In fact, there should be three, because there's the dwarves. There's the Forsworn, who occupied the city for a time, and who used to live in that city. And then there's the Nords, so there should actually be three styles of architecture in Markarth. But there's only one, so that was really disappointing. But anyway, here we are in Raven Rock, and there's two styles. And yeah, and then there's the mine. And the whole thing sits into a cliff, which is clever, because up until now, we've seen in a lot of the cities in Skyrim that in a city like Riften, there's like a pretty side and an ugly side, right? The side facing the lake looks really good because it's well designed, and then the back side is just ugly. Whereas, if you look at a city like Windhelm that sits in the mountain, or even Markarth that sits against a mountain, then there's only one front to design, and you don't have to design the back of the city because the back of the city is solid rock. So they've done this. They've kind of picked this here, where they've put the back of the city into this cliff, and so you only really have to design how it looks from the outside. So again, that's like a clever thing that they've decided. All right, we've done this before, and this is what works. And so they've done this again. They put the town against these mountains and against those cliffs, right? So that's cool. What else is there to say? And that's it, I think. I think that's it. Well, that's not it. Oh, then also this. The broken foundations. Again, the broken foundations of the buildings. You can see the history. You can see the history of the town is there used to be more Imperial buildings here, but for some reason they've been destroyed. And this is the evidence. The evidence are these foundations. And you know, remember when we were in Labyrinthian, which is supposed to be an ancient city, and I said it's maybe a city, because even though there were staircases and platforms, there were no building foundations. So you couldn't really tell where the buildings were or what the buildings were. So it was maybe a city because there was no evidence of buildings. It just had kind of spaces. Whereas here, we can see what the buildings were. We can see that this house is like that house. And this one is also pretty much the same size, and we can see the material, which is this stone, which is the same as that stone, and therefore we can see this is the Imperial buildings. And yeah, I mean, actually no, there's no doors. That's a bit odd. There's no doorway. Look at this. So the foundations are mostly right, but there's no, because if the door it should be a gap in the wall, right? But aside from that, like this is like here, so the door here, there should be a gap in the wall. But aside from the fact that there's no doors, this is a minor thing. you can see those foundations, and you can see how big the house used to be. So there's history that you can read in the architecture. And in the rest of the game up until this point, it's been a bit hit and miss. In some places there are things you can read, and in other places there's just nothing you can read. Like it's just kind of there's nothing there to read. So here there's plenty of stuff for you to read in the ruins, and the architecture, and the bulwark, and the ash, and the different styles. Like you can understand the history and the culture of this place just by looking at the two different styles of architecture. It's amazing. It's amazing, and obviously people have spent time thinking about this stuff. Am I right? Alright, let's go inside some of these buildings and check it out. So these Imperial buildings are kind of ordinary. I mean, they're stone, so they're quite sturdy, and but then the roof is straw and timber, which is it's not that interesting. It's actually pretty ordinary stone house, and they're all kind of a little bit copy and paste. So there's nothing remarkable to say, is it? No, there's nothing really all that remarkable to say about the Imperial buildings. Maybe the blacksmith. So the blacksmith, they've got a roof covering the forge, which makes sense because you don't want it to be rained on too much.
Look at me.
Let me just check if there's anything interesting in the layout outside. So you got pretty rough furniture. So these are not wealthy people. Although, I mean, it's not bad. No, it's pretty rough. Never mind. It's pretty rough. There's no chimneys. There's no fireplace even. So this one has the bed's up here. Pretty rough bed. So they're not rich. And then there's a basement, which is also stone. And then there's a kind of shrine in the basement. Although this is a treasure room. Okay, this is a treasure room. Cool, hey, nice. So, nothing all that remarkable to talk about. Pretty unremarkable architecture for the Imperials, that is. For the Dunmar, though, let's go into the tavern.
You can go, please.
So there, if you're not familiar with Morrowind, the Dunmar technology is based on bug shells. So a lot of like their armor. So they wear this chitin armor, or this bone mold armor. So they take bones.
Try walking the
Dude, shut up.
at night.
They take animal bones and animal shells, and they make those into armor. And they kind of laminate them with I don't know what it's called. Anyway, they use kind of laminated bug shells and bug bones to be armor, and I think their buildings are actually similar. It's like a giant bug shell, but it's not actually a giant horseshoe crab. They just kind of make it look this way. So you can see like it's almost there's a leather-like texture to it, right? Which I mean technologically and kind of it's just really a really interesting idea to use kind of animal shells to make a house. So that's what the Dunmar architecture is, and because of the ash and the volcanoes, they're like the buildings are designed to be relatively streamlined. Actually, I think I'm not sure if they're meant to catch the wind or not, but they're streamlined so that like the wind. I think there's sandstorm. Are there ash storms? I think there are ash storms back on Morrowind. So the weather's pretty unfriendly, and I think the bug shell shapes are supposed to help the building survive those too. Anyway, let's go inside the wretched niche. And much of the Dunmar building is in fact underground. So I mean, there's this kind of entry area, right? And this is a tavern, so there's plenty of tables and chairs and a cooking fire. But then the bulk of the building is actually underground. And look at these organic shapes. It's pretty interesting, right? Very interesting. Very cool. Morrowind has a lot of very distinctive and unique architecture, and you should play that game. So down here we have the bar. The furniture is cheap and ordinary, and barrels and barrels of alcohol, I suppose. And then of course there's rooms for anyone who needs a room to sleep in. Great. Alright.
Azura's wisdom.
We don't actually know how these things are constructed, of course. Like, we don't actually know what this stuff is. Is it bone? Is it stone? It doesn't. We don't actually know the technology used to build this stuff. It might be a sort of concrete. Well, not actually concrete, but it might be something like that, where it's kind of liquid until it sets and hardens. It could be something like that. Or it could be like a laminated bone and shell. Or it could be like a sort of a paste. Maybe like it's like a paste and you laminate pieces of things in the paste. That's possible. But whatever it is, it seems fluid, right? Because of how smooth and how rounded it is. It seems like it's something that is fluid and then turns into solid, like concrete, where you kind of pour it. Except maybe this one you kind of shape it and like clay maybe. It seems like that. It might be clay, or maybe something like clay, except that when it's set, it's much stronger than clay. So just the shape of it implies a certain technology, although I think it's not really explained exactly how this stuff is made in the game. But cool, I mean, it could be concrete. This could, I mean, you can make a concrete shape like this. It's quite difficult to make the molds though, because everything's curving. But you can pour concrete into these shapes if you wanted to. So yeah. Anything else? No, I think that's pretty much it. I wish we knew the construction technique. Like, I wish I knew the specifics of the construction technique. Anyway, let's go back outside. So the Dunmar stuff is much more interesting than the Imperial stuff, just because it's different and difficult to understand. Should we... Temple? Is it important to go into the temple? I don't think so. Let's go inside. The temple, they worship 3 Daedra. I believe it's...
Excuse me, but the temple is for followers of our
Oh,
faith.
shut up, dude. So this is their temple. So again, a very similar architecture. In fact, it's modular, so it's pretty much copy and paste the bits and pieces. So they worship Boethia, Mephala, and Ashura is who they worship, and they have this really interesting ink drawing style as well in their art. Very cool. Hey, look at those drawings. Very cool. So I mean, architecturally very distinct from the angular stuff that the old Nords have, right? The runic stuff. Oh, human bones. That's not sacrifices. They actually bury people like this. Cool. And it doesn't really have any precedent in our architecture, does it? Like, does any human architecture look like this? Not really. Right? Like, none of our cultures build like this, whereas the Imperials and the Nords, they're quite clearly medieval Europeans. And even the Archivir, they're Asians, kind of. Oh, I don't want to be in... we'll get back outside. Whereas, you know, in Morrowind, and here on Solstheim in Skyrim, you don't really know, you don't actually know what this stuff is made of, because there's no real-world equivalence. Which is kind of fun. It's really interesting. So this is the pure Dunmar architecture. The bulwark is interesting. I don't know if it's meant to be halfway between Imperial and
You may have everyone fooled,
and
but
Dunmar
I see
architecture.
what you're doing.
The staircase is kind of smooth. Look at that.
Although sends you scurrying
Like the smooth shape of this seems reminiscent of the Dunmar architecture, right? Of the staircase. But then we get here and this looks like This looks Nordic, like the windows and the wall like that. The Gothic arch is a little bit strange, but it's not really Gothic. So the wall looks half Nordic, half Imperial. You know, it looks a little bit like Solitude. It looks a little bit like Markarth, not Markarth, Windhelm. A little bit like Windhelm, a little bit like Solitude. And there's not a lot of Dunmer influence. Although remember, it was the Dunmer who actually spent the money to build this, and by the time they built it, I think it was the town belonged to the Dunmer. So I'm not sure about what the architecture suggests, like the style of this. It could be that they had a Nord or an Imperial architect design the thing, or they might have like Nord or Imperial workers build the thing. Let's go inside the bulwark and see what we have to say about it. So I'm going through this town really quickly, but if you, I really do suggest everyone buy the game and buy the DLC as well, and buy Morrowind and play that game as well, because it's pretty interesting. So as you play the game, you do the quests, you talk to people, you get actually much more of the story, and you understand even more of the backstory, and then you can kind of read the architecture and see how the story is being told through the architecture as well. So that's, oh wow, I didn't notice this. Look at this. Do you understand structure? Do you understand how building structures work? Now these are buttresses. But why are the buttresses asymmetrical? Why do they buttress one side and not the other? So they're like, if you think about the buttresses as parts of an arch, so an arch usually is like a semicircle, but it's not a semicircle here, it pushes up that way. So it resists forces from that direction. It's asymmetrical because the ash is only on one side. So the buttress only needs to push back one side. So this side of the bulwark is empty. This side of the bulwark has a bunch of ash piling up on top of it. And so then these buttresses have to push back this way to hold the ash back. The structure makes sense. I'm so impressed. Even the structure inside actually makes sense. Which is more than can be said for some of the other parts of this game. Let's be honest. But here, this is perfect. 10 out of 10. Really good. 10 out of 10 with buttress again. This is amazing. So, whoever designed the bulwark must have been trained as an architect. Like, how would they know? They must have been trained as an architect. Or an engineer. But an engineer wouldn't be working on a video game. So whoever designed this had architectural training. Pretty sure they have architectural training. Like, so the windows are only on this side because the ash is on this side. So you don't want the ash blowing in the window. So the windows are on this side, and the buttresses push back on this side. Amazing. Even the structure and the windows make sense. Oh, there's a fireplace too. Look at that. I'm so impressed, guys. I'm so impressed.
What? Ever seen a Redoran guard before?
Alright, so this is not all of Solstheim. So have I seen the map? Okay, this is Solstheim. So the ashlands are down here. Okay, no, the ashlands are more like down here. There's a bit of forest here, and then up north there's a lot of ice and snow. So the next place we're gonna go is Tel Mithryn. I don't know if I should walk there. No, let's walk there, because there's interesting stuff to see in the landscape as well. Not necessarily the architecture, which is what we're interested in, but geography, geology, both those things. Geology. I don't know if you've seen this kind of stone before. It's a particular type of lava that when it cools, it crystals, it forms crystals, and so that's why the stone is in those kind of hexagons. It's because I think they're hexagons. It's because as the molten lava solidifies into stone, it forms crystals as it cools. So this, I mean, what this means really for us is that this whole island is volcanic. if that's the case. So this is like a volcanic island at some point in the past. And I suppose that would mean... Oh, stop doing that. That would mean maybe the volcano's here? One of these mountains is a volcano, is what it means. Okay, so we want to go to Tel Mithryn, which is back that way. Let me just follow the coast, roughly. Roughly follow the coast. So you got the trees, right? And the trees are standing in the ash. I don't think they're doing all that well. Because these trees... What the... Oh, bugs. Not sure how these guys got here. So ash hoppers are also found on the mainland of Morrowind, of Valenfall. I guess they somehow migrated here, and now they're living in the ash here as well. And we have other buildings. This looks Nordic. Kind of. I mean, it could be anything. Nordic / Imperial. The roof is unclad. This is kind of strange, because this is not going to keep out the rain, obviously. Somehow the roofing material has fallen off the building. But otherwise it's got stone foundations and timber walls. So very similar to the Nordic buildings. Oh look, there's Tel Mithryn there, you can see... What is that? What is that? Is it a giant mushroom? It might be. So there's the volcano, continuing to spew ash. This is Fort Frostmoth. So this is the old Imperial fort that used to defend... This used to be the garrison that defends the island, the entire island. It's been abandoned for some time, and you can see that it is very similar to the architecture on the mainland. What the? So stone castles. In fact, even that lighthouse, we've seen that in Dawnstar. So this is Nord architecture, I believe, or Imperial / Nord architecture, recent Nord architecture, relatively recent Nord. So not ancient Nord architecture. Imperial Nord architecture. So it's pretty much a fortress, and there's not too much else to say other than that it is half ruined. Got a bit of castle walls back here. Where's this guy? There's someone trying to kill me. Can't see them. Never mind. Fort Frostmoth. We're not gonna go inside, but there's towers, there's walls, there's barracks. It's a pretty typical castle. Nothing special to say about it, I don't think. But you know, like, this is the sort of scale that makes sense in the game. Like, this contrasts this scale of a fort with Fort Dawnguard back in the Dawnguard DLC in the last video. Like, Fort Dawnguard was just ridiculous, right? And also the stonework. You can see the weathering and the age of it. Like, this is believable. And it's abandoned. It's an abandoned fort, like Fort Dawnguard was just before the DLC begins. So just before the DLC begins, Fort Dawnguard was also an abandoned fort. So Fort Dawnguard should really look more like this, instead of what we saw in the game, in the last video. Because, like, this is the story of an abandoned fort. And that's what it looks like. Or it should look like that. Alright, so here we are. The trees... These trees are not feeling happy. These are not happy trees. So the explosion of Red Mountain have made these trees sad and leaning. They're kind of not straight up anymore. So these are sad trees on the coastline next to the volcano there. But let's get past these sad trees and get to Tel Mithryn, where there's a lot of giant mushrooms. This is one of the other architectural styles in Morrowind. So the Telvanni, which is a bunch of mages. So the mages, the Dark Elf mages, the mage house, build their structures out of giant mushrooms. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that so interesting? And there's a Silk Strider too. So these giant mushrooms indicate that this is a Telvanni building, a Telvanni town, I suppose. Yeah, they literally grow giant mushrooms and then they live inside them. I don't think there's too much to say architecturally, because it's a mushroom. Like, it's it's a really interesting thing. But there's no construction technique other than growing a mushroom. I'm not sure if there's any kind of history to talk about either, because it's a mushroom. Well, they do put doors in it, so you can see. Let me see. So there's the mushroom. I guess they also it's partly just good horticulture, and partly there's magic involved, turning the mushrooms into these buildings. So it's a big hollow mushroom,
Let me know if you see anything you like.
and then they live on the inside, and the buildings are actually still alive. So conceptually very interesting, but I don't know if there's anything else to say about the architecture aside from that. Although if you go back to Morrowind, I mean the layout of the town actually reflects the political structure of the Telvanni. Actually, if you think back, okay, just remember Raven Rock. I didn't say this, but the councillor Morvain lived in one of the imperial houses, and it wasn't all that special. Like, it was a pretty ordinary house. And I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be indicative of like his humility, right? He doesn't have a massive manor that he lives in. Like, the biggest building in Raven Rock was the temple, so that indicates the piety of the people, because the most important thing is the temple. And then the house that the councillor actually lived in was just an ordinary house that everyone else lived in. And it was also like he was like one of the few dark elves who lived in one of the imperial houses. So I guess it's supposed to indicate how inclusive he is. Like, he's willing to live in a house of a different culture. Like, he's not racist, and he's humble. So that's the attitude. Whereas the guy living here, Neloth, we'll see him pretty soon. So in the Telvanni Tower, the biggest house, or the biggest mushroom, belongs to the mage, who here Tel Mithryn is Neloth. And Neloth, if you talk to him, he is not humble. He is the opposite of humble. Let's put it that way. And so his mushroom is much bigger than your mushroom, and he's not shy about it. And so his mushroom is the biggest one in town, and it completely dominates the entire town, right? And so this is reflective of their political structure, where he's the boss. As we headed this Neloth there. So he's the boss, and everyone knows it because he's got the biggest mushroom around. And he's a mage, so he's got all these kind of potions and things, and mushrooms and things, and various dwarven bits and pieces. So he's a mage, and he does a lot of reading and researching. He also lives forever, by the way. So yeah, like even where the people live, where the leaders of each settlement live, and how they live, and the size and the shapes of their architecture, tells you about their personalities and the political structure of their culture, right? So the Redoran town, the ex-imperial Redoran town of Raven Rock is inclusive and egalitarian, because the boss lives in an ordinary house. Whereas in Tel Mithryn, in the Telvanni town, it is extremely hierarchical and extremely authoritarian, as it were. Very interesting stuff. And I still think so if you you should play Morrowind. You really should. And not only play Morrowind, but either analyze the architecture for yourself or watch my series on the architecture of Morrowind. Because the way the architecture and the urban planning reflects the cultures in the game is so well done. It's so remarkable. Even though it's an old game. Morrowind is an old game now, and it's got polygon count limitations. Oh crap! There's more enemies. And so it's an old game, and technologically it's not very advanced. Like there's limited view distance and all that stuff, but in terms of design, in terms of just kind of architecture and design, it is so well conceived and so cleverly designed that everything makes sense. It's so great, and then it's seen here too on Solstheim in this DLC. Like the stuff here is also well considered. Not sure about the Reeklings though. I'm not sure if the Reeklings are racist or not. Like they're little goblin things in there. I don't know about the Reeklings. Anyway, let's go north. We want to get to the Skaal village, which is like yet another culture. So you know, back on Skyrim, there's like one culture, which is the Nords. I mean, there were the Nords, and I guess there's Imperials a little bit, and then there was a dwarven city of Markarth, and Riften's kind of Imperial. So, but it's all very similar in a way. Whereas, you know, here on Solstheim, there's the Skaal, which is a certain faction of the Nords. Not these guys. This is close though. And there's just a lot of diversity in the cultures. Like the cultures are very different from each other. You know, like Raven Rock is very different from Tel Mithryn. It's completely different from Tel Mithryn. Whereas if you look at Solitude and Windhelm and Whiterun and Riften and Markarth, they're kind of the same. You know, there's a Jarl, and then there's a rich part of town, and then there's a poor part of town, and then there's a marketplace, and then there's a temple. Like it's got all the same pieces. And if you play the game Oblivion, it's even worse. Like it's even more similar. So even though like superficially in those games there's like different architectural styles, but if you look at the actual details, like it's all just it's the same checklist of bits and pieces. I'm walking through the mountains, which is probably not the best way to go. So here's the Skaal village. So it's kind of nestled in the trees, which is significant. I'll read the book later on and you'll see why. So there's just a lot more diversity in both Morrowind and in Solstheim in this game. Alright, so this is the Skaal village. Let me just have a brief look around. So they're Nordic. And you can kind of see that they have Nordic architecture, very similar to the buildings in Whiterun, except there's more snow on the rooftops. In fact, I'm not sure how they managed to stay up with that much snow on the rooftops. So yeah, very similar to the buildings in Whiterun. Timber, not too rough, but also not too fancy, except for the Chief's Hall. What's it called? The Great Hall? Great Hall. Alright, before we go anywhere... Oh, and then there's like a central well, and a central space for the food as well. So food and water is central to the town, even more central than the blacksmith, which is back here. So again, that indicates what's the most important thing in their lives, right? Which is food and water. Not too surprising. Alright, let's go read about the Skaal. What's the book? Children of the Ore Maker by Fasten of Solitude. If the title of this text rings familiar, then perhaps you, like me, have had the great pleasure to become acquainted with a most remarkable people, the Skaal of Solstheim. Upon first meeting these gentle wild folk he calls them, so they're, according to him, they're not civilized. I was immediately impressed with their great hospitality. They welcomed me into their homes, one and all, without the slightest hint of suspicion or uncertainty. Trust, it seems, comes readily to the Skaal. In appearance, the Skaal are clearly of Nord ancestry. However, they are culturally distinct in several significant ways, the most notable of which is their faith. Having never adopted the pantheon of the Empire, the Skaal recognize only a single deity, whom they call the All-Maker. For the Skaal, the All-Maker is the source of all life in creation. When a creature dies, its spirit returns to the All-Maker, who shapes it into something new and returns it to Mundus. The concept of death as an ending to life is unknown to the Skaal. Rather, death is seen simply as the beginning of the next stage of an endless journey. This great respect for life is evident in one of the most important Skaal beliefs, a concept the villagers call oneness with the land. The Skaal try to live in harmony with their surroundings, making as small an impact on their environment as possible. Oh, this is important. So the oneness with the land try to live in harmony with their surroundings, making as little impact on the environment as possible. Just keep that in mind. So they live with the land. That's the concept for these people. When a Skaal villager sets out to collect firewood, for example, he or she takes it from fallen dead trees. When the Skaal hunts, it is only out of necessity and not for sport. Because they hold all life in great reverence, the Skaal people will resort to violence only as a last resort. This has understandably led to a rather austere lifestyle for these simple, good-natured folk. Austere lifestyle, keep that in mind. For the Skaal, the word luxury is nearly an alien concept, although I was intrigued to note that one villager, Elder, has taken to trading basic goods with travelers who pass through the village in exchange for small luxury items. Such an enterprising outlook is something of a novelty for the Skaal. Though it saddens me to conclude this account on such a somber note, it is impossible to deny the hard truth that the Skaal people are dwindling. In a century or two, it is possible that their unique way of life will be lost to the world forever, reduced to little more than a footnote in the great epoch of history. This comes as little surprise given the immense hardships of a life lived in such an extreme environment. For the Skaal, it is a daily struggle to survive the perpetual wintry climate of northern Solstheim. But other challenges have recently appeared. The ashfall from Vardenfall has taken its toll on the plants and animals upon which the Skaal depend for their survival, and life is now a struggle for all who call Solstheim home. Therefore, I humbly beseech any student of history who might encounter this modest text to travel to Solstheim and learn all that can be learned of this noble people and their ancient customs. The Skaal people might not be long for this world, but let us assure that their proud and noble legacy lasts well into the future. So, austere lifestyles? Very simple? Taking from nature only what is needed? Well, this... If you look at the buildings, it's not quite as austere as you might imagine. Cause look at the timber. I mean, there's metal bolts, right? The timber is cut. The planks are flat and planed. So these are not log cabins, right? So I've talked a little bit before about kind of logs. If you build a log cabin, you just cut down the tree, strip off the bark, and you pile the logs up. If you build a building with flat bits of wood, it means you have to cut the log into flat pieces. So there's more work and there's more cutting. And then you have stuff like this, carving. So you have to spend time carving these patterns out of the wood. This is not exactly an austere lifestyle. These people have spent quite a bit of resources to build these buildings. And I want to get inside one of them just to check the interior. So these are not simple buildings, and in terms of engineering, they're quite complex too. Look, there's the columns, there's the diagonal bracing. So if you don't know what the bracing is meant to be for, so when there's wind or earthquakes, the building gets pushed sideways. So the wind will push the building sideways, and in order to resist the sideways movement, you need diagonal bracing, which is these usually metal bits. Are they metal or wood? Or they're wooden here. So wood is okay too, but often you have kind of metal strips going diagonally, so this one, so if you kind of do this, if you try to push the building that way, like from that way to that way, then this will hold it in place. The diagonal piece will hold it in place. So what I'm trying to say is, if you take a square with loose corners, then you can kind of shift the square into a parallelogram because the joints are loose, right? Whereas if you have a triangle is always a triangle. You can't actually shift the triangle as long as the corners are pinned down. So by turning the rectangle into what is essentially two triangles, you stop it from moving. Right? You stop it from moving when it's pushed that way. And the same with that one, the same with that one. So putting diagonal bracing reinforces the building against lateral movement, which is a really kind of, it's not a simple concept. So according to the architecture, not only are the Skaal chopping down trees to get timber, but they're also sawing them into planks, and they also understand engineering well enough to put in diagonal bracing. So these are not austere houses, is what I'm trying to say. So in the book, they talk about the Skaal living with nature, But this is actually a lot more sophisticated than that. So the Skaal are technologically more advanced than they are supposed to be in the story, and that's a little bit of a mismatch. In my opinion, that's a mismatch and a mistake. I feel like these buildings really should be much more simpler than this. And there are other buildings that are more simple than this. I mean, I don't know, it just seems like there's a lot of detail here that doesn't quite match. Let me just go into the data. A lot of detail here that doesn't entirely match the story being told. Like, everything is a little too fancy, is what I'm trying to say. You know, like even the orc longhouses were less detailed than this. And back here, there's even a stone. So this person has not only built a timber bit, but also a stone bit. I just want to sneak in here. I want to look inside the buildings. Just see if I can do that without being caught. So let's observe the furniture, and look how flat the wood is, and look how straight it is. So like really straight, really flat wood. It actually takes a lot of work to make something like that when you only have hand tools, right? So these days we have machine tools like bandsaws and circular saws that make it kind of easy to do this stuff. But if you're only using a handsaw and a hand, like a plane and like a chisel, it's actually not easy to make something this rectangular with your hands. So this is like this sort of level of detail and like these kind of circular bits of wood. So everything, I'm just trying to say that everything has a lot of investment in it, and it should be more expensive than what the story implies. And like there's metal bolts even, although they do have a blacksmith smelter outside, so I guess they have metal to work with. But there's a lot of bolts, and I mean these days bolts aren't amazing, or bolts, what's the big deal? When you have to make bolts by hand, they're really expensive. Like bolts and nails and metal brackets and things, back when you had to do everything by hand, were really expensive. And so like even like nails were non-trivial when you have to make each nail by hand, right? And that's the level of technology that we have in Skyrim. And so, you know, the Skaal. Oh wait, I didn't see the furniture. Judging by their architecture, they are wealthier than what the story says. The furniture is rough and simple. All right, and the skins and the rugs are also rough and simple. All right, so. But you know, I mean, they're rough and simple, but they're no less prosperous than, for example, Whiterun. And Whiterun is like a trade hub in Skyrim. So I don't know, it doesn't fit. I don't think it fits. I don't think the technology, as evidenced by the architecture, fits the story. There's an arch here. You can actually see the sunrise from here. It's pretty nice, but it's the wrong time of the day. So the Great Hall is even another step fancier. So there's more carvings and more intricate windows. Look how intricate that is. How long does it take to make something like that? And like even like this stuff is carved, and then there's a lot of bolts. There's just a lot of investment in these buildings. Am I right? Like, look how big this is. This is not... Yeah, this doesn't feel like an austere, simple lifestyle. This is fancier than my house, is what I'm trying to say. This is... I mean, if I moved from my house in real life into this house, that would be an upgrade. Well, except there's no electricity and no internet, but other than that, this would be an upgrade. Look how big this is. Look how intricately carved. Look at this. Look at the carving on those things. Can I see it up close? Look at the intricate carvings there and the carvings there. No, there's nothing austere about this. And even the furniture is fancy. well, half fancy. It's the intermediate level. Yeah, I mean, okay, all right. Well, it doesn't fit. The story and the architecture doesn't fit. But if we kind of just look at it, so there's the central hearth again. This looks, in fact, it's a bit like it's a bit like Dragon Reach, isn't it? So in terms of layout, it's also similar to some of the richer houses in Whiterun. So you can see how they're Nords. So the architecture indicates that they are related to the Nords, and their architecture it's got a similar layout, right? So there's like bedrooms upstairs. Well, it's not even rooms. So it's like a one big central hall, sleeping areas upstairs, and then there's like a fire and a food area downstairs, and then there's some ancillary raised spaces to the side. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, so architecturally you can tell that they're Nords because the layout is the same as a lot of the Nordic architecture in the rest of the game. It's just too fancy though. There's just too much money here. Too much money. Because the Skaal aren't meant to be able to afford anything this fancy. And it's really, I mean, it's jarring to me. It's really like, it's really dissonant. As somebody who kind of who understands architecture and who's seen a lot of architecture, like you tell me, okay, these are poor people who live with nature, but they're clearly not. When you live in a house like that, you're clearly not poor people living with nature. Which, I mean, if we go on a tangent, like some of the people these days who say, though, I support the environment, and then they live in modern houses. So, it's to an extent. I mean, you can to an extent minimize your energy use, and then you can minimize your impact on the environment. But if you're still living in a fancy house, there is a limit to how environmental you actually are. Anyway, so there's all the buildings on Solstheim that I want to look at. There are other things. But I'm not going to look at them. There are other things such as the Temple of Mirak, and there are other things such as the Daedric realm of Hermaeus Mora, which I'm not going to look at those stuff, but those are interesting to play through if you buy the game. Alright, so this actually ends the series, where it's a pretty quick run through of some of the major architectural locations in the game of Skyrim. Obviously, the game of Skyrim itself is much bigger than this, although most of the architectural styles we've covered, and of course the major cities we've covered. So yeah, I mean the game I think is well worth playing, and the architecture is well worth paying attention to. But then it's not perfect, but there are moments of brilliance, and I do think that Bethesda really, you know, in the important parts, they really made sure to spend a lot of time making it good. You know, I mean, they couldn't make everything great because, you know, every game has a deadline and a budget. But I think they've done pretty well here. Alright, I guess I'll end here, and thanks for watching.